On the morning of January 8th, 1815, Andrew Jackson stood behind a wall of mud and cotton bales outside New Orleans. Facing him, thousands of battle-hardened British soldiers, veterans who had helped defeat the greatest military mind in European history. The British suffered more than 2,000 casualties. Jackson's side lost 71. New Orleans held. The United States held. There is one detail almost every textbook leaves out. A peace treaty had already been signed. 15 days before that battle, on Christmas Eve, 1814, American and British diplomats had ended the war. Nobody in New Orleans knew it yet. More than 2,000 men became casualties in a battle history would later call both heroic and tragically unnecessary. But that is not the strangest part of Louisiana's story. Louisiana exists because a revolution of enslaved people in Haiti destroyed Napoleon's empire, forced him to sell a continent, and accidentally handed America nearly 1,000,000 square miles of land for less than 3 cents an acre. And in the year before Louisiana became a state, a man named Charles Deslondes helped launch the largest slave revolt in American history. As many as 500 people, armed and marching toward New Orleans, chanting 2 words: freedom or death. This is how Louisiana was forged. To understand why Louisiana became American, you have to understand what Napoleon Bonaparte needed and why it collapsed. By 1800, Napoleon had a plan for the Americas. The centerpiece was Saint-Domingue, the western half of Hispaniola, now Haiti. One of the wealthiest colonies in the world, it ran on the forced labor of more than 500,000 enslaved African people and generated enormous wealth for France. Napoleon expected obedience. What he got was a revolution. In 1791, enslaved people in Saint-Domingue rose in one of the largest revolts the world had ever seen. By the time Napoleon came to power, the rebellion had lasted a decade and showed no sign of stopping. Louisiana, in Napoleon's plan, was the supply depot, shipping food and timber to Saint-Domingue's plantations. Without Saint-Domingue, Louisiana was worthless wilderness. The two were supposed to be inseparable. In 1800, Napoleon quietly negotiated Spain's return of Louisiana to France. He had his empire. He just needed to crush the rebellion first. He sent his brother-in-law, General Leclerc, with roughly 40,000 soldiers, one of the largest expeditionary forces France had ever assembled. Their mission was to crush the rebellion and to reinstitute slavery. The mission failed completely. Leclerc's army was destroyed by Haitian resistance and by yellow fever, which killed soldiers by the tens of thousands. Leclerc himself died in November 1802. France could not hold the island. Napoleon's advisors delivered a verdict that could not be argued with. If France could not hold one small island against a revolution of the enslaved, it could not hold the Louisiana territory against American expansion. In the event of renewed war with Britain, Louisiana would simply be taken. Louisiana, the supply depot without a colony to supply, was a liability Napoleon needed to sell. In Washington, Thomas Jefferson had been watching with growing alarm. New Orleans, at the mouth of the Mississippi, was the economic lifeline of the American West. Without access to that port, farmers in Kentucky, Tennessee, and Ohio had no viable path to market. He sent James Monroe to Paris with a specific mission: buy New Orleans. Their budget was $10 million. Their target was one city. That was all Jefferson needed. On April 12, 1803, the American diplomat already in Paris, Robert Livingston, met privately with Napoleon's Treasury Minister, Barbe Marbois. And Barbe Marbois made an offer that Livingston almost could not process. Napoleon did not want to sell New Orleans. Napoleon wanted to sell everything. All of Louisiana, more than 800,000 square miles, land that would become all or part of 15 American states. The price? $15 million, roughly 3 cents an acre. They said yes before they even had the authority to do so. Here is what history tends to rush past. Jefferson did not believe he had the legal right to do this. The Constitution said nothing about purchasing foreign territory. He wrote privately that a constitutional amendment would probably be required. He drafted one. He hesitated, and then he signed the treaty anyway. One of the most principled constitutionalists in American history set aside his own principles to complete the greatest land deal the world had ever seen. On April 30th, 1803, the United States doubled in size overnight. And the people already living in Louisiana, French Creoles, Spanish settlers, indigenous nations, enslaved Africans, free people of color, had been transferred to a new country without anyone asking them. They were not pleased. The Governor Jefferson appointed to run the territory of Orleans was 28 years old, competent, loyal, and could not speak French. New Orleans in 1803 was a French-speaking Creole city a century in the making. A petition sent to Congress by Louisiana residents called the Territorial Governance Despotics. Congress initially refused to promise a path to statehood at all. But 40 miles up the river, something far more dangerous was building. The Louisiana Purchase had made this territory American on paper. 1 year before it became a state, the people America refused to free tried to decide its future for themselves. His name was Charles Deslondes. He worked as a slave driver on Manuel Andre's plantation on the German coast, one of the most trusted positions an enslaved person could hold. He monitored other enslaved people. He enforced discipline. To the planters around him, Deslondes looked controlled. That may have been the most dangerous illusion in Louisiana. On the night of January 8, 1811, Deslondes led a group of men into the Andre mansion. They wounded Manuel Andre. They killed his son. They seized the plantation's weapons. And then they began to march. Word spread down the river road faster than anyone anticipated. At each plantation they passed, more people joined, armed, on horseback, on foot. By morning, the column had swelled to somewhere between 200 and 500 people, moving in formation toward New Orleans, 40 miles away. They wore what military uniforms they could find. They carried cane knives, axes, and guns. They moved in organized ranks, and they chanted, "Freedom or death." Planters fled ahead of them. Riders raced to New Orleans with the alarm. The German Coast Uprising of 1811 was the largest slave revolt in the history of the United States, larger than Nat Turner's rebellion, which would come 2 decades later. The column made it more than 30 miles before Army regulars and militia intercepted them. What followed was brutal. 95 rebels died in total. The heads of those executed were mounted on poles along River Road, a line of deliberate terror stretching toward New Orleans, visible from the water, designed as a message to every enslaved person on every plantation along the Mississippi. Deslondes was captured 4 days later. He was tortured and killed, and the planter class worked deliberately to suppress the story, to ensure as few people as possible would ever know how close it had come. For nearly 2 centuries, the German Coast Uprising was almost entirely absent from mainstream American history. Less than a year later, on April 30th, 1812, exactly 9 years to the day after the Louisiana Purchase, Louisiana became the 18th state of the United States, the first state carved from the Louisiana Purchase, the first state west of the Mississippi River. The heads of the men who had marched for freedom were still on poles along the River Road. 2.5 years after statehood, Britain sent a fleet and 8,000 soldiers toward the Gulf of Mexico. The target was New Orleans, Andrew Jackson assembled an army from whatever was available: Tennessee militiamen, Louisiana Creoles, regular army troops, Choctaw warriors, and free men of color who had been part of Louisiana's militia tradition since before American control. He also accepted the offer of a pirate named Jean Lafitte, who brought men, weapons, and powder in exchange for pardons. Jackson had called them hellish banditti. He took the deal anyway. On Christmas Eve, 1814, American and British diplomats in Belgium signed a peace treaty ending the war. The news would not reach New Orleans for weeks. On January 8, 1815, 15 days after that treaty was signed, the British launched their assault. British casualties exceeded 2,000. American casualties numbered 71. The Battle of New Orleans made Jackson a national hero. Songs were written, paintings commissioned, the legend was born. Almost none of it mentioned the free men of color who had stood in his line. Think about what it took to get here. A slave revolution in Haiti that shattered Napoleon's empire and set the greatest land deal in history in motion, without anyone in America asking for it. A president who believed in the Constitution more than almost anyone, who set his own principles aside and signed the treaty anyway. A man named Charles Deslondes, who stood inside the system that enslaved him, learned its rhythms, and led 500 people through the Louisiana night toward a freedom they never reached. A battle fought 15 days after peace had already been declared. And the free men of color at Chalmette, who helped hold New Orleans when Britain came, celebrated briefly for what they had done, then watched the rights that made their service possible get slowly stripped away in the decades that followed. Louisiana was not built on a single story. It was built on 4 or 5 stories happening simultaneously, in different countries and different languages, by people who would never meet, whose decisions crashed into each other like rivers joining at a delta. The Mississippi still runs to the Gulf. It has always carried more than water. If Louisiana's story surprised you, the like button and subscribe help more people find what textbooks left out. Every state in this series was forged by forces no one fully controlled. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.